No man is rich enough to buy back his past.
All the world is a stage, but the play is badly cast.
The one way to get rid of temptation is to yield to it.
Some cause happiness wherever they go. Others, whenever they go.
Life imitates art far more than art imitates life.
Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's. Their lives a mimicry. Their passions a quotation.
Man is least himself when he talks in his own
A
person.
cigarette is a perfect
Give him a
type of
mask,
perfect
and he will
pleasure.
tell you
Love
if
It's
in
it's
your
hot.
exquisite. It
A life
always
without
leaves
it
one
is like
unsatisfied.
Every saint has a
I
past,
have
and
the
every
simplest
sinner
of
has a
tastes.
future.
Work?
I am
Nowadays,
the
people
first
are the prize of everyone. Their thoughts are someone else's. Their lives a mimicry.
It is only in the theatre that I have lived.
Well, I congratulate you on your good taste in coming to see me tonight. And I can see you enjoy my company almost as much as I do myself. And I am the Wilde you've come to expect, aren't I? The wit, the dandy, the shocking homosexual. But did you know that the term homosexual wasn't actually common currency until long after my martyrdom? Long after I'd been imprisoned and crushed by 2 years of hard labor for my sexual tastes. Now, I didn't think of myself as a homosexual. No, categories are for the census takers, the peddlers of advertisements. After all, as thoughtlessly as I treated them when the theatre made me dizzyingly rich, I did love Constance and our children. And we gave gorgeous, lively salons together in matching, aesthetically cut suits and dresses. And when I was trying to gain a brilliant reputation for my magazine, A Woman's World, I had to write a few articles for me. Some of my most beloved fairy tales began as stories told to my children at bedtime.
The court's ban on my ever seeing the children again. I've always regarded as the cruelest part of my punishment.
No. To categorize oneself is a first step toward mediocrity. When individuals realize themselves, well, no one is mediocre.
No, I just loved boys. And I felt myself to be in a tradition, a grand communion of great souls that stretched all the way back to the contemplative beauties of Hellenic Greece. Not to mention all the buggering that goes on in the finer English schools. England's leaders all have boys in their past, not just a few in their present, though it amused me to flaunt my desires that for them were a shameful secret. Oh, hypocrites! They couldn't let themselves desire freely. Certainly they couldn't let themselves love freely, not in the way that I let myself love Bosie.
Ah, Bosie. That profligate, terrible, beautiful boy. Ours was one of the great tragic loves. A love that destroyed me several times over.
Yes, his extravagance drove me to debase my genius in lucrative theatrical entertainments for society, whose gentility I knew to be a fraud.
His hatred of his father drove me into the courts, and from there into 2 years of brutal, humiliating labor in the darkness of an English prison.
And his abandonment of me after I was released. Well, it broke my heart and my will to write.
But the stable boys, who the police in their picturesque fashion like to call rent boys, well, that was mere play, a pleasure that I refused to deny myself. And the repressed English were so titillated by my flaunting that they allowed themselves to be distracted from how clearly I had seen through them. They used the uproar around my sexual life to ignore how deeply I had seen the cruelty and injustice that they called good society.
By good society, meaning, of course, those with money and power. Money and power, the iron fist inside the white gloves of the society dinner.
I suppose you have wealthy overlords in your age as well, yes? Though goodness knows what they consider good manners. Perhaps their cruelty, their corruption, their essential vulgarity has come to the surface in all its ugliness and is now on naked display.
But in my London there was pretense. Glittering pretense, cruelty masquerading as nobility. Nobility. Think of it. We still had lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses, marquis and marquesses. They still ruled, but my quarrel was not as much with them. The nobility, at least, surprisingly often were gracious. It was beautiful. They were lovelier in their hypocrisy. I could enjoy them for that. No, my main quarrel was with the Philistines. Those vulgar middle-class fools who held up the whole system that the nobility had created and ruled over it, not realizing that they were choosing to be slaves.
Voluntary slaves. That is all.
And their industriousness is what kept the whole machine going. The whole imperial, ugly, capitalist machine, along with all the pain and suffering that comes along with it.
I always thought that beauty was the answer. At the age of 28, when I toured America offering my grand oration on the transformative power of beauty, I took my stand against the cruelty of society that the rich had created, against the ugliness of it. I thought that cruelty and ugliness were two faces of the same hypocrisy. Now with beauty comes kindness and justice to all.
Dear mother, she had raised me to be a revolutionary, and it was for her that I wrote The Soul of Man Under Socialism, to skewer the hypocrisies of the wealthy philanthropists and to portray a society reimagined so that poverty would be simply impossible.
A society in which there would be no more people living in fetid dens and fetid rags and bringing up unhealthy, hunger-pinched children in the midst of impossible and repulsive surroundings.
Perhaps the rich in your age are no less selfish and cruel than the rich of my London. And perhaps your age can learn the lessons of mine, of my age, and my life.
For the deepest cruelties are not deliberate. They are a failure of imagination, an inability to accept or understand the suffering of others.
More than condemning the rich for their indifference toward the poor, I pity them for their smallness of spirit. The self-absorption that blinds them to the true suffering of others and leaves them unable to feel real joy, to experience beauty in all its richness. Their lives are fever of petty concerns that are a prison for the soul. Wealth can degrade the spirit as surely as poverty can.
Sadly, I know this from my own experience.
The wealthy never stop to contemplate the world or their place in it.
My best philosophical dialogue begins with the epigraph. Some remarks on the importance of doing nothing. I rarely meant anything I wrote literally, but I meant that, knowing, of course, that the nothing I meant was the richest, the fullest experience possible, the nothing of opening oneself to the contemplation of beauty.
For I did share my mother's revolutionary beliefs. I did wish the suffering poor to have beautiful lives. I wanted a revolution. But it was contemplation. And the visions born of those beautiful reveries that would make the way for a better world. Not her strident style of activism.
Dear mother, she had been such a figure in the Irish resistance. All those nationalist poems and all those radical newspapers. And her absolute absurdity of a pen name. Speranza. Speranza! Why she felt the need for all that Italian that flourishes, the key to why she wore those outrageous spangled headdresses, that garish vermilion makeup, that clattering rainbow of jewelry. She cruised through her salons like a gypsy battleship, beguiling and disparaging, taking absolutely no prisoners. Well, couldn't fault her for her ambition.
The artist rebel. Yes. She wanted me to be both. Worse. She wanted me to sacrifice myself to both. I carried vibrant martyrs in the names she gave me. Fingal, O'Flaherty, doomed, mythic, Irish heroes. And when it came time for my own martyrdom, she pushed me toward it. 2 years before the hopeless trial that sent me to prison, when all of my friends pleaded with me to flee to Europe, when the government itself wanted me to flee and spare them the embarrassment, my mother said, "If you stay, I will always be your mother. But if you go, I'll never speak to you again." So, I stayed. And I was martyred.
And then, Mother died while I was in prison. So she never had to see how destroyed I was when I was released from prison. She could die believing her son to be bravely bearing the punishment in the face of English hypocrisy. The rebel, the martyr. But my martyrdom is old news. That isn't why I'm here tonight.
Well, neither am I here as the brilliant playwright. Yes, the wild of the comedies is where my fame lives. Fame, which pleases my...
No! No. Tonight, I invite you to discover with me what it means to be many selves. Selves which always coexist. Selves which take turns being at center stage. In my old age, there was a touch of my youth. In my youth, there was a touch of my old age. And on throughout my life, like all of us, I was always many selves at once. Selves which were sometimes in harmony, sometimes in discord. How can we bring harmony out of that discord?
For it is the revolutions in ourselves which are key to a revolution in society. A generosity toward ourselves has its twin in a generosity toward others.
I only turned my hand from the contemplative visions of revolution to the playful satire of the society comedy, when those visions failed to produce much in the way of cash.
Cash I increasingly needed to satisfy Bosey's expensive tastes in dining, gambling, hotels, and boys. And the vanity which had come with my success in the theatre was no longer the playful pose of a genius on the cusp. It was a vanity which had grown, curdled, and compromised me.
Vanity had been my playful protest against the ugly, the misguided aspirations of the Philistines, the cruel suppression of themselves that so easily became their suppression of others.
In the face of that, my vanity was a form of provocation. Provocation that pointed back towards the self-love of my beloved Greeks, towards the happiness with the self and the body that glows incandescently in their art.
And, not incidentally, in their celebration of the love which can flourish between those with the same body, a love of a self which is like oneself, was a natural embrace of those great thinkers.
But As the centuries rolled on, thinking gave way to faith. Faith became subservience. Subservience became subjugation. And well, that just became self-loathing.
Yes, the thread of vanity that ran through my younger selves was a spirited protest against the self-loathing and the cruelty that was its twin.
But in the whirlwind of my success and the madness of my love for Bosie, that dazzling lord whose beauty turned my head, vanity swallowed me whole and poisoned the best parts of myself. But a decade earlier, when I was 28 and embarking on my lecture tour of America, I took the world stage as my own for the first time. I suspected I had genius. Perhaps I did.
My vanity didn't yet own me. It just gave me courage. Enough to begin to express that genius. And my conviction, yes, conviction, that sturdy old word, so mistreated by the moralizers of the age, that it is visions of beauty that can remake the world and create a more beautiful life for everyone. And what brings beauty into our lives but art? Into our lives and into our society. Thank you, Oscar. Wars and the clash of armies and the rise of nations, there must always be. But I think that art, by creating a common cultural atmosphere between all nations, make men such brothers that they would not go out to slay one another for the folly of some king or minister. Fraternity would come no more with the hands of Cain, nor liberty betray freedom with a kiss of anarchy. For hatreds are always strongest where culture is lowest.
A truth which certainly accounts for the vindictiveness of the press, no?
As far as remaking society, our modern machinery has not much light in the labor of man after all. For poor life so often attempts to understand the visions offered by art, and so often bungles the attempt. Hewers of wood and drawers of water there must always be, but at least let the picture that stands by the well be beautiful, and surely the labor of the day will be lightened. Let the wood be made of some receptive, beautiful, lovely design, and surely no longer will discontent come to the toilet, but joy. For the true spirit of art is not rebellion, but peace. There is nothing in common life too mundane, in common things too mean, and in life that art cannot sanctify. Art is what makes the life of each citizen a spiritual sacrament, not commercial speculation. We spend our days, each of us, in searching for the secret of life. Well, the secret of life is in art.
When I left my lecture tour in America for England, the great movement I'd hoped to inspire was yet to emerge. Yet. I trusted the ages to give me my due, but in America I learned that speaking plainly to an audience leaves them passive. It's a mistake to give people an answer, and there's nothing left to do with an answer but ignore it. And the world, despite the unexpected success of my lecture tour, the many elegant dinners I was invited to, did just that. No. I learned that the complacency of the public, that the passivity of my audiences needed to be unsettled with paradoxes and parables and puzzles. Works that have the vitality of the unresolved and the provocativeness of true beauty. Works that startle people into asking questions of themselves, of their society. Posing these questions would take the full range of my considerable powers and draw on just about every part of myself.
when I was unable to afford life as an artist, the sudden success of the theatre went to my head. From being a spinner of potent, provocative stories, revolutionary essays, and paradoxical dialogues, I became merely a society wit. Made coarse and arrogant by my financial success, I became a seeker of thrills. I lost accord with myself, the deep harmony of body and soul which I sought in my youth. I abandoned for the discordant joys of mere hedonism, the fiery-coloured thrills which led to my disgrace and downfall.
May 18th, 1897, the day of my release from prison. The beginning of the exile of the man you see before you. Dear, loyal Robbie Ross, who long ago introduced me to male love, who managed my money during my exile and ensured the proceeds from my copyrights went to my children who were there to greet me. While I luxuriated in the sunshine, the warden told Robbie that a man like myself, unused to manual labor, who had received the sentence to hard labor that I had received, would be dead within 2 years. I lasted a little over 3. What was left of myself in those 3 years? Well, I knew myself to be many cells, but prison had shattered me. I did not know if I would retrieve the great joy, the sense of beauty I once took in life, whether my life would be one of unremitting sorrow. But the truth is rarely pure and never simple. Joy and sorrow are twins, not opposites. We can only understand ourselves and each other when we understand that the truth about our soul is one whose contradictory is also true. To become my best self again, I would have to face and embrace all of myselves.
So yes, I do forgive you your youthful naivete. And if you can forgive my broken weariness, then to some measure I can once again be you, dear boy, the high-spirited darling of the day, the apostle of beauty.
It is you I most need to forgive. Once I was a seeker of beauty. I dreamed of transforming the world, of inspiring a culture built around beauty. You dreamed only of money and fame. Dreamed. I should say desired. You had no dreams. Desires only. You began to live a life of hard materialism that was unworthy of an artist.
Well, I am not a scrap ashamed of having been in prison. I am horribly ashamed of the hard materialism of life that led me there. The vanity, the pleasure-seeking. It was, yes, unworthy of an artist. You ceased to be lord of yourself. You were no longer the captain of your own soul, and you did not know it. You became careless of the lives of others. You became mired in yourself and yourself alone. You forgot those who needed your love. You took pleasure where it pleased you and passed on. You let pleasure and vanity dominate you. You ended in horrible disgrace.
It is true. I must say to myself that I did ruin myself, and I am quite ready to say so. As terrible as it was what the world did to me, what I did to myself was far more terrible still. I lost my soulful communion with beauty. I fell into long spells of senseless and sensual ease. I amused myself, being a dandy, a flaneur, a man of fashion. I surrounded myself with the smaller natures and the meaner minds. I became the spendthrift of my own genius, and to waste an eternal youth gave me a curious joy. Tired of being in the heights, I deliberately went into the depths in search of new sensation. What the paradox was to me in the sphere of thought, perversity became to me in the sphere of passion. Desire, in the end, was the malady or madness, or both. I forgot that every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character. What one has one day done in the secret chamber, he must someday cry it out on the housetop.
People used to say of me that I was too individualistic. After the brutal humbling of prison, I've realized I must be far more of an individualist than ever I was. I must get far more out of myself than ever I got, and ask far less of the world than ever I asked.
Indeed, my ruin came not from too great individualism of life, but of too little. The one disgraceful, unpardonable, and uncontemptible action of my life was to allow myself to appeal to society for help and protection from the harassment of Bosie's mad father. Once I had put into motion the forces of society, society turned on me and said, "Have you been living all this time in defiance of my laws? And do you now appeal to those laws for protection? You shall have those laws exercised to the full. You shall abide by what you have appealed to."
exile is quite often a desperately lonely and humiliating existence. I am insulted on the streets of Paris by English tourists. Former society friends who see me approaching turn their heads and hurry away. When I try to retire quietly into the country, I am chased from hotel to hotel, either because of my insolvency or my infamy. And so, at so many little places where I thought a monster could be anonymous, English guests request with the monotonous regularity of Philistine morality that I be asked to leave. So the cafes of Paris have become my refuge. These bohemian cafes, far out of sight of the class of Englishmen that still condemned me, became places where I began to see what I could rebuild from the ruin of my life, having gone from the highest pinnacles of adulation down to the deepest pits of infamy. In exile, I would have to bring myself back to life. All of myself. I was by now several lives away from the young boy who went to America a decade and a half ago, dreaming of transforming the world with his ideas and writing and charm, with a lily in one hand and a champagne glass in the other. And I was 2 dark and brutal years away from my glittering heights and shadowy secrets of my jaded years as a popular entertainer. Perhaps while the prisoner could become my defining self. Perhaps I would eke out my life in sorrow, broken and suffering. I faced the challenge of reviving the complexity of myself. And I was weary.
Once I knew happiness, or thought I knew it. It was always springtime in my heart. My temperament was akin to joy.
Now, I am approaching life from a completely new standpoint. To even conceive of happiness is often extremely difficult for me.
But in all of us there is a little of each other, each seeking expression, each seeking to embrace life. That may be our salvation. I always thought of the self as having multiple possibilities, and of my life as realizing each in turn. Perhaps we can be revived by our most vibrant self, the Oscar at the height of our powers.
1891. Oh, what a year.
Yes.
My year of miracles. 6 books in print in a single season. 2 books of gorgeous fairy tales. Written for the child and every adult. A collection of comic modern tales that tweaked high society by the nose. A collection of sparkling philosophical dialogues that celebrated a realm of beauty far beyond the ugly, the misguided aspirations of the Philistines. A twisted nightmare of a novel, Dorian Gray, which the public caused a scandal for when it saw its ugliness reflected in Dorian's corrupted picture. And out of my love for my mother, for I did deeply love her, in the soul of man under socialism, I analyzed the wickedness of private property with a wittiness that shows us that greed is a prison, and that kindness sets us free. All that in a bookstores in the same year.
And yet, my greatest artistic triumph was not in the bookstores, but at elegant society gatherings. I always said that to my writing I gave only my talent. My genius I gave to my life.
Yes, all the fashionable women of London were all vying to send out invitations which said, "Come see Oscar Wilde, tell a new story."
My ability to enchant the most worldly of society guests was in full flood then.
I could weave a story simultaneously full of darkness and lightness, full of compassion as well as humor. I made stories that drew on all of them. which were made from all the facets of myself.
When I was at my peak as a storyteller, the society ladies who invited me to the dinners all imagined the dares that I was improvising a story, preparing a story, just for them. And I was. Just not in advance. My fund of stories was so inexhaustible, my imagination so nimble and free-flowing, my communion with beauty so alive that the slightest suggestion, a phrase from a book I'd read that day, a chance comment from a guest, a lovely object displayed across the room, I could take up and weave into an iridescent tapestry of words, a musical stream of tale after tale that set myself and the entire table aglow, entrancing them with shimmering humor, moving them with vivid scenes of sorrow. I recall on one particularly incandescent evening, Princess Orison, the wife of the Russian ambassador to France, screamed and ran from the room because she thought she saw a golden halo appear around my head.
With an almost telepathic sensitivity to their moods and personalities, I brought my listeners out of themselves, and they followed my pipe laughing or weeping, called out of their everyday selves into a world more vivid and alive than any they had ever known.
Writing out my stories was a bore, when I forced myself to, but pen to paper to amuse myself, I loaded them with ornament, purple prose, which, of course, my friends complained ruined the tale's purity and power.
But in my improvisations, I fell into a kind of waking trance, in which the vanity was scoured away and I was opened up to the realm of beauty,
Yes,
sharing its gifts with all those around me.
the spoken word was my best medium. I was never more in harmony with myself than when discovering a new story. The spontaneous joy I took in telling my tales, entrancing my listeners like a spell woven of sunshine and shadow.
Gentlemen, shall we tell a story? A story that draws on each of us. A story that brings us all to life.
An excellent idea.
Perhaps The Glass Eye.
Yes.
The tale I improvised at Lady Berwick's Diamond Gala, when a guest mentioned that a friend had lost his eye in a hunting accident. Once, a very vain and very rich young gentleman had the gross misfortune to lose one of his eyes in a hunting accident. So, after the accident, he decided that he would have made for himself the most beautiful glass eye in the world.
It would, he hoped, to be a glass eye worthy of his wealth, personal beauty, and name.
And so, out of the rarest crystal and the finest enamel, the miniature masterpiece was wrought.
The shadowy pupils seemed to have been made of velvet, and the deep green waters of the iris sparkled tiny flakes of gold.
When the rich young gentleman looked at himself in one of his many, many mirrors, why, he half fell in love with himself again.
The rich young gentleman had now invited a friend over to test out his new eye and to receive many compliments on its beauty. But the friend immediately identified the glass eye and offered only half-hearted praise. "Well," the rich young gentleman exclaimed, "you only knew which was which because you knew me before the accident. Let's go out into the street and ask the first person we meet." Having agreed to a gentleman's wager, they went out. And there, leaning up against a wall, was a miserable beggar. One of those poor men whose spirits have sunk so low that they are unable to summon up enough courage even to ask for money when the rich pass by.
Indeed, he looked so forlorn that the rich young gentleman's friend took
pity on him, yes?
The
No.
rich young gentleman sauntered up to where the beggar was standing and asked him with an air of condescendence whether or not he wanted to earn a crown.
A crown, sir, answered the beggar. Oh, that would go by very well with me, sir. But you see, sir, the truth of it is I haven't eaten in days.
Having explained to the beggar exactly what he had to do, the rich young gentleman nonchalantly tossed a coin, a crown, into the beggar's hand, and stood directly in front of him. The beggar did not need very long to come to his decision. After 1 or 2 seconds, maybe, the beggar identified the artificial eye. The rich young gentleman stepped back in amazement and asked how he had been able to identify it just so easily.
Oh, it is, sir, replied the beggar, a very simple matter. For you see, sir, your glass eye is the only one in which I can see any pity.
I once said to my dear friend Ada Leveson, my beloved Sphinx, that there was enough suffering in one poor back lane of London to show that God does not love man.
I could see clearly that the glitter of London society depended on the dark shadow world of the poor. I could see the injustice of it. I could see how unnecessary the suffering was. I saw that capitalism and Philistine morality were 2 faces of the same cruelty. One, a system designed to exploit the poor. The other, a system designed to keep them safely in fear.
And I saw that injustice was also a blight on the souls of the rich, and that greed and callousness and possessions corrode the soul and rob it of its beauty.
But what I didn't see, or let myself see, was my own sorrow. A sorrow which tolls through my tales like a funeral bell. It was with me from an early age, and had from that time engendered in me imagination enough to appreciate the suffering of others. For there was a funeral behind that sorrow.
February 23rd, 1867. At the age of 10, after several cruel weeks of suffering, my beloved younger sister Iola died of scarlet fever. I was 3 years older and known as Ossie, her pet name for me. I was a gentle, affectionate, dreamy boy whose lonely and inconsolable grief sought vent in long and frequent visit to Iola's grave in the village cemetery. My mother sent me away to preserve my own health.
In my first book of poems, my introduction to the world of myself as a writer, a year before my lecture tour to America, I wrote a poem for Iola. Tread lightly. She is near under the snow. Speak gently. She can hear the daisies grow. All her bright golden hair tarnished to rust. She that was young and fair, fallen to dust. Your lilac, white as snow. She hardly knew she was a woman. So sweetly she grew. Coffin board, heavy stone lie on her breast. I vex my heart alone. She's at rest. Peace, peace. She cannot hear lyre or sonnet. All my life's buried here. Heap earths upon it. Kept an envelope, the lock of Iola's hair. And on the envelope, I drew 2 gravestones. Gravestones surrounded by crosses and heavenly light. One grave with her name on it, and another with mine. I dreamed that we would one day be reunited.
I carried that envelope with me for the rest of my life. Kept it as a constant reminder of that cruel loss.
That envelope with the lock of her hair and the twin graves was one of the few possessions of my own I still had with me in the days of my exile. It was discovered among my effects when I died.
With Iola's grave heavy within me, the joy and laughter and beauty that twined through many of my stories became a way to lighten that weight. Bring myself back into harmony.
With nowhere to share my mourning, not with my formidable mother, and not with my Victorian contemporaries, there was nothing for it but to transform pain into beauty through the alchemy of storytelling, to weave moments of joy out of a deep intimacy with sorrow.
My next story, I call The Artist. One evening there came into his soul the desire to fashion an image of the pleasure that lasts for only a moment. And so he went forth into the world to look for bronze, for he could only think in bronze, but all the bronze in the world had disappeared except the bronze for the image of the sorrow that endures forever. Now this image of the sorrow that endures forever, he had created himself with his own hands, and he had placed it on the tomb of the one thing he had loved in life. He placed it on the tomb so that it might serve as a sign of the love of man that never dies, and a symbol of the sorrow of man that endures forever. And all the bronze in the world had disappeared except for the bronze of the image of the sorrow that endures forever. And he took the image he had created and set it in a great furnace and gave it to the fire. And out of the bronze of the image of the sorrow that endures forever, he had created an image of the pleasure that lasts for only a moment.
People always assumed that the entombed dead thing the artist had most loved was his wife. All my life's buried here. Heap earth upon it.
As an artist, as a companion to my friends, I transformed my private pain into shared moments of joy and beauty.
I came to understand that others' suffering mars my own joy.
So as well as weaving visions of beauty, as well as courting laughter, I dreamed of utopias. Utopias where hewers of wood and drawers of water realized the fullness of themselves in their own lives. Realized themselves as the artists of their own lives.
I came to see that a just society is a work of art, and that poor life needs the visions of art, not just to soothe its pain, but to offer it new beginnings. I saw that in a society where poverty had disappeared, we would finally see the perfect man.
Now, by the perfect man, I mean one who is developed under perfect conditions. One who is not wounded, or worried, or maimed, or in danger.
Is that utopian? A map of the world without utopia on it is not even worth glancing at. For it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing. And when it lands there, it looks out and sees a better country ahead and sets sail for it. Progress, indeed, is utopian's fullest realization.
Kindness. Kindness is a work of art. It is not given to us, but we must create it. And that is all.
I learned from an early age that life is ugly, cruel, and unfair.
And I refuse to accept that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I touch now in conclusion on the deepest wellspring of our very souls. We spend our days, each of us, in searching for the secret of life. Well, the secret of life is an art.
What life teaches us is how cruel it is, and how clumsy it is, how unformed, how unrealized it is. In its brokenness, life wounds us, but it is only in art, in the expression of beauty, that life becomes whole. Art allows us to bring together what life so blindly tears apart. I tell you, the secret of life is to unify body and soul through art, to make the soul incarnate and the body full of spirit.
Well, the secret of life is that there is no secret.
I spent 2 years in prison, and in that terrible school, I learned humility. The humility that scoured away the vanity and the pleasure-seeking into which I had so grievously fallen. A humility that returned my soul to me. I have learned that the secret of life is in suffering.
People like to say of me, with a superior sneer, that I was artificial. But what people call artificial is simply a means of multiplying the possibilities of one's personality. In exile, I learned that the secret of life is that there are many secrets to life. Just one won't do. To embrace the humility I learned in prison, to break the fever of vanity and thrill-seeking which led to my imprisonment,
I had to free myself of all possible bitterness toward the world. I had to make everything that happened to me in prison good for me.
The plank bed, the loaves, the hard ropes, stripped into strands until your fingertips were dull with pain. The menial offices with which each day began and finished, the harsh orders that routine seemed to necessitate, the grotesque dress that made sorrow impossible to look at, the solitude, the silence, the shame. All of these things and more I had to transform into a spiritual experience.
In prison, I learned that humility is the ultimate realization of the artistic life.
Humility in the artist is his frank recognition of all experiences. It's his recognition that he must accept and embrace all of his experiences and turn them into the beauty that cures life's wounds.
Freed by humility from my vanity, I could be an artist again. I was open to the world again, to its sorrow, but also to its beauty. It is an artist that I wish to live in whatever remains to me of life. The glittering world of society in which I used to move is a graveyard to me now. I seek a new life beyond its confines. Oscar, shall we have another story?
Why, certainly. This story I call the greatest story in the world. When Jesus went to the place where the dead man was laid, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth!"
And he that was dead came forth, and at length, when they had freed him of the grave clothes that had been wrapped around him, Lazarus did not fall down at the feet of the one which had awoken him, but remained apart and weeping.
And Jesus drew nigh to where he was standing, and said to him in a whisper, "Why do you weep?"
And Lazarus replied reproachfully, "Why, you have brought me back from death into life. What else should I do but weep?"
And, Lazarus continued, you have spoken falsely to me. Why do you persist on telling me lies about heaven and our eternal God?
For know this, Rabbi, there is nothing after death. And once you are dead, you are dead indeed.
When Jesus heard this, he raised a finger to his lips, and with an imploring look he said, "I know, but don't tell anyone."
Christ's afterlife might not exist, but I've had my own afterlife. Out of the abyss of disgrace, out of the tomb of prison, I came back to life. We all did.
Christ, in his many moments of wisdom, said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." This was not a command.
No, because Christ did not give commands. He made beautiful suggestions. He improvised parables. He dabbled in paradoxes. I admire his work.
Love thy neighbor as thyself is a description, not a command. Christ saw that people love others in the same way they love themselves. If you judge yourself harshly, you will judge others. If you stifle your own individuality within Philistine morality, you will stifle others. If you make your life ugly with greed and vanity, you will also rob other lives of their beauty.
It is best said by Christ, not by Christ, but by myself. That to love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong Romance.
Out of humility and sorrow, I want the most important revolution of all. Came to love myself once again.
All of myself.
That love has transformed me, has made me beautiful again. It has reawoken my gift for improvising stories, stories which draw on all of me, stories which nourish all of me. Opened again to beauty by my embrace of humility, I discovered that my genius was still alive, though I no longer had the strength to write. Prison had kicked that out of me. I was still brimming over with stories and ideas.
And I always preferred telling those stories to my friends rather than scratching them down on pieces of paper in a lonely room.
Our gift for tale-telling we share now with new friends in the cafes of my exile in Paris.
Friends too low for good society. Friends too low even for my artist friends to countenance sometimes. But we have always been egalitarian in the company that we keep.
In the height of my glorious youth, I delighted in staying up late and drinking up late with the roughs who spent their lives working in the mines of Leadville, Colorado.
In London, in my decadent middle age, I enjoyed myself by dining with the rent boys. Being in their company was like feasting with the panthers.
And I never played down to my audiences. I always lifted them up. I didn't lose that gift.
Yes, perhaps the dramatic plays were too purple in their passage, too melodramatic. The comedies, at times, too brittle in their cleverness. My sense of tragedy and comedy were blended in my improvised stories into something with the mysterious power of a parable.
Out of dreams, the world is created by the singer.
Through the contemplation of beauty, we find inspiration to create a more beautiful world, a more just world, a kinder world. Beauty that draws us beyond the unimaginative brutality of the mob. Beauty that allows us to be citizens in this world. It is only through the cultivation of the habit of contemplation that we shall be able to rise above our prejudices.
Only through contemplation can we engender the spirit of kindness that will cure the blight of poverty and still the drums of war.
Exile, while full of losses and deprivations, is also a liberation from the pressures of society and writing and success. What to others seem empty hours sitting alone in disreputable cafes. Our hours spent in contemplation, communing with the divinity of beauty, all while reverently smoking my cigarettes. The evanescent stories born of that contemplation and communion are all that I have left to give, and I give them freely to my new cafe friends.
My dear friends, shall we have one last story? Oh. The young king on the eve of his coronation, through the mystery of dreams, discovered the sordid reality behind the creation of his golden crown, his bejeweled scepter, his shimmering robe.
Each of these three dreams show the king that his fine raiments are made for him at the expense of the suffering poor. Men who die wretchedly in the mines, divers who drown searching for pearls, hunger-pinched weavers who weave golden robes with bruised fingertips.
And in the dream of the golden robe, the young king spoke to the weaver, who replies,
Knowest thou not
said the weaver.
that out of the luxury of the rich cometh the life of the poor?
In war, the weaver continued, the strong make slaves of the weak, and in peace the rich make slaves of the poor. We must work to live, though they pay us such mean wages we die. We toil for them all day long, and they heap gold in their coffers. And our children fade away before their time, and the faces of those that we love turn hard and evil. We tread out the grapes, and another drinks the wine. We sow the corn, and our boards are empty. We have chains, though no eye beholds them, and are slaves, though some men call us free.
Is it so with all? Asked the young king.
It is so with all, the weaver replied, with the young as well as with the old, with the women as well as with the men, and with the children as well as with those who are stricken in their years. Those merchants grind us down, and we must obey. And the priests ride by and read their beads, and no man has care of us.
Through our sunless lane creeps poverty, with her hungry eye, and sin with his sodden face close behind her. Misery wakes us in the morning, and shame sits with us at night.
And there, the dream ended.
When the young king awoke the next day, the day of his ascension to the throne, the young king refused his golden crown, his bejeweled scepter, and his shimmering robe, and donned a simple shepherd's tunic, a wooden staff, and laid a crown of briar upon his brow.
The nobles of the court were filled with wrath at his spurning of their wealth and pomp, and raised their swords against him. And on his ride to the church of the coronation, a bishop scolds him for abandoning his kingly raiment, and tells him that the sorrow of the poor is just too great for one man to bear.
Sayest thou that in this house? Replied the young king.
And a brilliant shaft of light illuminated him where he stood. And his crown bloomed lilies, his staff bloomed roses, and all those angry nobles and scornful bishops could not look at him. For his face had become that of an angel.
We all have stories stirring to life within us. Some of us have the generosity, the humility to hear them.
We are all the artists of our own lives, and our ultimate realization is to cultivate what is beautiful within ourselves and in those around us, and to share our stories, the beauty that shines in each of us.
I lived for a time entirely for pleasure. I I shunned suffering and sorrow of every kind. I hated both. I had known them well enough as a boy. I resolved to ignore them as far as possible. That is to say, to treat them as modes of imperfection. They were not a part of my scheme of life.
Now, I long to study suffering and all it brings one. Out of suffering has the world been made. And at the birth of a child or a star, there is pain.
For you must let all your voices speak. Those that speak of suffering as well as those that speak of joy. You must listen to them all or you will never know who you are. And to know is to love.
Key to a revolution in society. First, inside ourselves. A love for others has its twin in a love for ourselves.
The only people I care to be with now are artists and those who have suffered. Those who know what sorrow is, as well as those who know what beauty is. Like Lazarus, when Jesus brought him out of the grave, I do weep for my life, for myself. And for others, for the suffering, the poor, the rich, the Philistines, I weep for them all. But I am also merry, for I know that beauty can touch each of us wherever we are, if only we listen to its call. But come! I tire of talk. Let us go out into the fragrant night and seek the love that sees and embraces all that we are. The love in whose light we all should live.